one thing that everyone can probably do a better job of just really making sure you're approaching it from the perspective of that person. If you're working with the decision maker or versus an individual contributor, also understanding where that company is, like how can you help every single person there and solve for them using your product?
This isn't your average revenue podcast. It's Ashley and Katrina's Infinite Revenue Playlist, powered by Commsor. And it's your new work bestie. Through conversations with other women in the revenue space, Ashley and Katrina get candid about their unique experiences, help women tackle challenges in the workplace, and uncover ways to grow as revenue pros. Maybe you'll learn a little, cry a little, laugh a little, have an epiphany, or at the very least, get a killer playlist to listen to while you work. Being a woman in this industry is wild. Let's talk about it.
Hello, I'm Ashley.
And I'm Katrina.
Welcome to Ashley and Katrina's Infinite Revenue Playlist.
Today, we're being joined by a fellow colleague of mine, Kate Reed. Hello, Kate. She is the head of customer experience at Commsor, which is where I work. And we're really excited in particular for Kate to be here because we've had a lot of sales-focused guests on the podcast. And Kate comes to us with a little bit of a different background. So, Kate, thanks for being here.
Glad to be here. So excited that y'all are doing this. And I was really excited when you asked me to come for a chat.
Of course. We knew you had to be on this with us. So I'm going to read your bio real quick so everyone knows who you are and what background you're coming to us with. Kate has a very diverse background that includes everything from being a music journalist, which is perfect for this podcast, to sales, to marketing, and then, of course, customer success. She has over 10 years of experience managing enterprise and mid-market clients, including 6+ years in the customer success field, where she's built many end-to-end customer experiences at various companies like Commsor and Hubspot by shaping holistic, consistent, and integrated journeys for her customers. In her spare time, you'll find her hiking, gardening, running marathons, or toddler wrangling, because she has a very cute boy named Max. And obviously, I can personally vouch for Kate being an absolute kick-ass customer experience lead since I work with her on a day-to-day basis. And we're really excited for her to be on today to specifically talk about handling tough conversations, which I think is relevant for all people in the revenue field. And of course, something that's not fun, but maybe Kate has a little bit of a different perspective, but dealing with angry customers.
As you all know by now, our podcast has a bit of a musical twist to it. The Infinite Revenue Playlist was inspired by the concept of having a walk-up song. As sellers and other revenue-related roles like customer success, we are always/often compared to athletes. The walk-up song is something that pumps you up, that gets you ready before you step out into the field, or in our case, pick up the phone, hop on Zoom, whatever it is that you're doing day to day to crush your day. So, Kate, with that in mind, what is your walk-up song?
So my walk-up song is Talk to Me by Stevie Nicks. I've seen her at Jazz Fest a lot. I'm a big fan. So that's one reason I chose it. The other one is that I feel like the key to providing a good customer experience is understanding your customer and talking to them. Because if you don't talk to them, you're not going to really know what's going on. A lyric that stood out to me about this song was, "There's no sense dancing around the subject. A wound gets worse when it's treated with neglect. Well, don't turn now. There's nothing here to fear," which I think is a good one for kind of the hard conversation theme and about just getting kind of straight to the point and trying to understand where your customer is at and how you can help them.
Did you know that Stevie Nicks is touring right now?
I did. I wish I could see her again, but I don't think it's going to work out.
She's coming to New York soon, and I would love to see her.
So, girls trip?
Yes, I'm down.
I think you picked Stevie Nicks because she's such a queen. So thank you for adding that to our playlist.
This is actually, I think, our second Stevie Nicks song that someone's picked. But this one is perfect for the topics that we're going to be chatting with you about, which, as we said, is handling difficult conversations and managing angry customers. And before we get into those topics, I know I read your background, but if you could give kind of our listeners a little background of like who you are and what you're currently doing at Commsor, I think that'll be good context for why you're the right person to talk about these topics with.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I'm Kate Reed. I work at Commsor currently, where I'm the head of customer experience. So, I'm managing our end-to-end customer experience that our Commsor customers have. What that means in practice is collaborating a lot cross-functionally to think about what those customer touchpoints are, how they are interfacing with us. I directly manage our success, support, and onboarding motions. So, in terms of my history, I have a diverse history, like Katrina alluded to. I first started interfacing with customers or got exposed to customers, I would say, when I worked in hospitality. After that, I went into agency where I worked for a marketing agency for about 5 years. My clients there included like Marriott and Virgin Festivals. And that was where I started to realize while I loved the creative aspect of marketing and the data-driven aspect of marketing, where I really shined and was really, really passionate was with the clients. So there I grew to the director of client services. In 2019, I made the switch from agency to SaaS, which was a big jump for me and really exciting. And I worked at HubSpot as a CSM in their mid-market function. And then from there, I came to Commsor a couple years ago, starting as our director of success and kind of building out that function here at Commsor.
So, Kate, you have experience both walking into kind of a pre-existing customer experience and building one from scratch. And I'm curious, now that you've built our entire customer experience at Commsor, like, what do you think is most important in the customer experience process? I would say customer experience, but
Yeah, I think no matter whether you're dealing with a huge enterprise customer or a small SMB customer, whether you're going from 0 to 1 or whether you're working at like a Forbes 500 company, you have to understand your customer and think about how you're solving for them first before you think about how you're solving for yourself, your team, or your company. So first, how do I solve for this customer, which requires some empathy. It requires some time to think about who the customer is, why they bought your software, whatever you have in the first place, and where they wanted to go with it. And this can be done in a lot of motions. It doesn't mean monthly calls or QBRs. It could be as simple as making sure that your product-led motions are really thinking of things from the perspective of the customer and presenting them with options in the right time.
I think that's applicable across all customer-facing roles, not just customer experience and success. And I'm curious, I know, yes, of course, you have to talk to them. You really have to understand them and empathize. Like, what are some very simple ways that someone could do that?
You mean besides like the obvious of like talking to your customer?
Yeah. Besides the obvious.
Yeah, I think really understanding who your customer is and how they're using your product or whatever it is. So that doesn't only come from conversations with customers. While it's helpful, I think that a lot of folks don't, like, especially if you're working with a large list of prospects or a large book of business of customers, don't research enough or think about not only who the company is, but who you're speaking to and what their role is and why they should care. So I think one thing that everyone can probably do a better job of just really making sure you're approaching it from the perspective of that person. For instance, if you're working with the decision maker or versus an individual contributor, also understanding where that company is, like, did they just go through a layoff or are they doing really well right now? Like, how can you help every single person there and solve for them using your product?
I love that you're calling this out on the customer side because that sounds very familiar to me as the person who's bringing those people in the first place. It doesn't go well if you don't know at least a little bit. And we've talked about it before. They're researching us before they get into, like, that's the minimum. They know who we are.
Yeah, you better be researching them too.
Yeah, we need to. And if they're our customer, like, that's just silly not to have a little bit of data on them.
So besides I want to dig into the research bit a little bit because we all know, right? You should research your customer, your prospects, etc. What are some specific criteria or points you think are maybe kind of left field or creative to look up before a conversation? Because I think the typical things are like, what's the size of the company? How much money do they have? The basic stuff. And I'm curious if there's other specific things you found in your career that are really important to know heading into conversations with them.
Yeah, I don't know how creative this is, but I think kind of going back to thinking of company versus the people that you're talking to, really looking at the LinkedIn of every single person you're speaking to and the people that you're not, and understanding what their experience is. Like, because not to overgeneralize, but you'll know, like, if someone's director of sales, you can pretty easily guess like where they're coming from. But if they also have marketing experience, you know they might have a different perspective than a traditional director of sales. So I think really digging into the past experience history and like where they've worked as well, whether they've worked with big names or startups, what communities they're part of, what kind of content they're posting across those communities, whether it's LinkedIn or somewhere else, I think is really important to approach it. Because if you only look at the company size, if you only look at the company revenue, their ARR, you don't really understand the people that you're talking to. And if you only work off title and don't go out after like the whole experience of that person and what they're about, you could really miss some easy conversations that will set you up for success quickly.
I always make it a habit before I reach out to someone, whether they're a pre-existing customer or prospect, I will always look at their most recent LinkedIn posts that they've themselves posted, if they have some. And I'll look at the first 5 and I will read them through. I'll read the comments. And if any of them are relevant to the conversation we're going to have, I always make sure to bring it up so they know that, hey, like, I'm following you. I care about the things that you say and the things that you write. And I know it's relevant to you. And I think that's a really simple, easy tactic that we can all use heading into conversations with customers.
Yeah, and looking at their activity as well. So not only what they're publishing, but a lot of folks are lurkers. They get busy at work, but they have LinkedIn on their app or another community. Looking at their activity and what they're liking can be quite revealing as well about what they're just thinking about.
Totally.
So let's get into the sticky situations. Once someone's a customer, sometimes it's not all smooth sailing. There are times when you might have difficult conversations, whether it's someone trying to churn, they're not happy with your product, they're frustrated because they don't know what to do in their job. And I feel like people in success roles, more so than sales, in my opinion, tend to have those difficult conversations. And I want to know, how do we even approach having those difficult conversations in the first place?
Yeah, so I love angry customers. I love those difficult conversations because they're a huge opportunity for you. Those are the customers, the ones that are actually telling you they're mad or disappointed or unhappy. Those are actually customers that care enough to tell you. So you're already winning in some way because at least they're not completely disengaged with you and gone. So in terms of the approach, I think it's whatever the situation, kind of similar to one of the last questions you asked, really getting all the context you can and approaching at least that first conversation more as a position for being curious about where they are and how they got there, rather than immediately barging in and trying to solve it immediately. The rest of it kind of depends on the particular situation. The amount of resources you're willing to throw at it to solve for them also can depend, or whether you can at all. But I think the first step, no matter what the situation is really understanding where the customer is coming from, being curious about it, and putting their entire experience with your company in context, not just maybe the problem that they're bringing to you at the moment.
I love that you said, I love your perspective that you actually love angry customers because it shows that they care enough to be angry in the first place. And I think for people that are new to having those conversations, it's not really about what they're saying. It's more so the tone, right? It can be really scary to handle someone that's yelling or heated or just attacking you or your product. And I'm curious, like, do you have any tips on how you can maintain your tone and stay calm when you're dealing with someone that's actually angry?
Yeah, absolutely. And I worked service industry before.
That's
I
some
went
real
into,
angry customers in the service
I think
industry.
I think it's a really actually helpful quality to people that work in customer success. If you've worked service industry before, or any other like customer facing roles where you're dealing with like really high volume angry customers, that was kind of where I learned not to take it personally, which is the key, is like not making it about you or your experience with them in particular, but being really curious about like, okay, what happened here? Obviously, like, we can't tolerate swearing at people or being like incredibly unprofessional. Like, we don't want our people to be abused. But that's honestly, I wouldn't say rare, but most customers in like software where I work are not at that point. They're just simply disappointed or frustrated. So not taking it personally and just really being curious about how they got there and making it a point to say, hey, tell me what's going on from your perspective. I see this on my side, but I really want to hear about what is going on and like what the challenge is for you.
I think I want to kind of sprinkle in, because this is a Women in Revenue podcast, right? I want to sprinkle in a little question about your experience with dealing with people who might be angry as a woman. And I do feel like on the success side of things, there's a little bit more diversity. Like there are more women in your role than probably in ours. So I just want to hear your thoughts on that perspective.
I think it was more difficult when I was earlier in my career. So I'm thinking kind of back when I started an agency. So this would be about 2014 through 2016, where some of the problem was, while I always listened to my customers, it would be harder. It would take me longer to gain their trust and have them take me seriously. I didn't have any male counterparts to compare myself to, so I can't say for sure it was because of my gender. It also could be due to my inexperience, quite frankly. And the way I overcame it was just by listening and delivering. Because once I delivered and once I actually, it's really important, obviously, after listening to empathize and make sure you're hearing. Like, am I hearing this correctly? Did I nail it? Like repeating it back to them and really understanding. As I've gotten older, I haven't like personally experienced any anger coming at me from my customers. I think from a gender that's slightly gendered. It's mostly been just like pure frustration that they purchased a software and they have some sort of fear or hurt. A lot of times it's fear like of reputational damage or something like that. Yeah, I'm trying to think of other examples, but I think for me, it's just really about getting to the bottom of it.
Experience, and that's valid. I just was wondering if you had any perspective on it. I think it's really awesome and impressive that what I'm hearing from you every time you talk about your customers is empathy. And like, oh, well, maybe I need to understand this. And I think that this is where they're coming from. And I think that's really a statement about you and why you're good at your job, right? Like you've moved up and you've started to take on this leadership role. And I think that's really cool. So good job.
Thank you. Would you like me to tell you about my angriest customer?
Or I would love that. I would love that. That's a perfect transition.
So I was fairly new in SaaS and I had a customer who, and I had the same thing in an agency where I like love a good turnaround. I find it challenging. I find it fun. It's way more rewarding and they're often way more loyal than like a customer that came loving your product or your service and just continues to renew. But getting somebody that absolutely hates you guys because you've disappointed them and turning them around like can leave that customer, like often will very rarely leave you. Sometimes they're quite difficult to work with or like they don't like many vendors. So you have less competition once you've earned their trust. So this particular customer was really upset because, and she yelled and she was yelling at me on the phone and she was specifically upset because of something not working in the product. And when it didn't work, there was an emoji there that was like, she felt really making light of the situation. So on the surface, it seems like a ridiculous thing to be like screaming about, right? But so I let her cool off and then I went and talked to her and she'd also like, was known among support and other folks. Like she'd been very upset about this particular thing. And when I talked to her, I found that she was newly VP of sales. She had a lot of pressure. She had made this investment on this product that was being questioned, as well as other pressures going on. So it had absolutely nothing to do with the emoji. It had to do with she had an expectation and she was fearing reputational damage and reputational pressure based on what our product was not delivering for her. So with that, I could come up with finding out, okay, what were those expectations that they had? What were her main goals with it? And figuring out, okay, here's what we can do. Here's what we can't do. And I'm going to be transparent and honest with you about it every step of the way. So that way we can solve this together and you can make a decision at renewal. So I think like that's an example where it's—
Did you renew?
They did renew. And when I went on mat leave, they were like one of the customers that were like, we want to stay with Kate, even if it means not having a CSM for 4 months.
That's amazing. And
they also upgraded and expanded. But It's not just because of that conversation, it's also the follow through is huge. But I think it's really important because it can be very easy if you're in support and you're just dealing with a bunch of tickets, or you're a CSM and you're thinking of them as numbers. If you just look at it at the surface and say, this person's being unreasonable, like you're not getting the whole story and you're missing out on an incredible opportunity.
How did you stay calm when she was screaming at you about an emoji? Like, do you have tips about staying calm and composed when you're faced with situations like that?
Yeah, if you have to mute yourself, but really just listen. And you're not there to say, there's a really good book. I forget when it was published. I want to say like 2014, 2015, 2016, called Hug Your Haters by Jay Baer, which was one that my old CEO, Tyler Anderson, it was like a required reading for us. And it really, I think having worked in hospitality and social media before, like sometimes people just need to vent and it has nothing to do with you. And so just sit there and listen. If it gets obviously unprofessional or unreasonable, you have to, you may have to excuse yourself and revisit it at a later time. But yeah, so I listen because obviously they're upset. Otherwise, they wouldn't be talking to me.
Yeah.
In that way.
What's really interesting about everything that you're saying about that whole situation, right? You keep bringing up like active listening, curiosity, and keep asking why. And that has been a trending theme for every episode that we've filmed with each guest of what they think is most important to be successful in a revenue-facing role. Every single person, whether they describe it in a little bit of different way, says active listening, curiosity, and empathy. And I think it's so, apparent, right? Based on that story that you just shared, that you demonstrated all three. And not only did you turn the situation around, but they wanted to stay with you and they ended up upgrading, which is amazing.
Yeah. And those could be qualities that, like, when I'm hiring, like, that you also, like, how do you hire for that? How do you look for that? Because a lot of people can talk the talk, but not walk the walk when it comes to those. Because you can say, oh, duh, of course you need to be curious and have active listening. And
so how do we walk the
empathy.
walk? How do you suss that out when you're hiring someone?
I think a lot of questions that are situational. So tell me about a time where you demonstrated whatever. Tell me about a time where you solved for this, or tell me about a time that you dealt with an angry customer is something I've asked before in CSM interviews. And phrasing it in that way and having them tell you about a time can actually be quite revealing. Sometimes in a way that is good for them, and sometimes in a way that makes you realize this wouldn't be the right fit. So I really lean on those kinds of more situational questions that speak directly to the experience and let them describe it rather than tell me how you actively listen.
Right. Because they'll be like, I am an active listener.
That's so funny.
But yeah, and also making sure that it's for the hiring team, that it's part of your criteria and something that everyone is testing for. So that way everything gets tested for sometime in that hiring pipeline.
So you said that you worked in social media, right? And that really helped prepare you because, as we know, the internet is a wild place. And I feel like people, if there's one place where someone's willing to be mad and angry and let that show, it's the internet, right? Because you're hiding behind a screen. And I'm curious, in a digital age, when you're not always talking to customers, face to face or on a Zoom call or even on a phone call, sometimes they'll take their frustrations online to a forum, a community, Twitter, LinkedIn, etc. And I'm curious if you have any advice on how to manage or respond to negative feedback that's on public platforms like that.
Yeah, this is a really fun question. It's one I enjoy. In my first HubSpot interview, they had a question it was like, what do you prioritize? They were testing how you prioritize. And they said, what do you prioritize first? And one of the options was, you have an angry customer tweeting at the CEO and founder at the time, Brian Halligan. And I forget what the other options are, but my response was like, I'm all over that Brian Halligan tweet immediately. And the person interviewing me was laughing. So yeah, I would say it does depend on the brand and the type of feedback that you're getting. So again, back to like Hug Your Haters, which I feel like I'm like plugging this like 10-year-old book, but it really is a good read. Asking yourself, okay, why is this person posting this feedback? Is this what you'd call like an onstage hater, where they just like literally just want to hate? There's nothing you're going to be able to do about it. You might have your initial response just to show that you're listening. But other than that, this person doesn't actively want their problem solved. They just really want to vent on the internet because they are mad. So I think really evaluating like what kind of feedback it is and whether this is a case where you want to, address it, take it to a DM, take it to a private conversation, and then pass it along to your support or your success teams, an agency if it's that case, and actually directly address it and solve for them. Or if you're dealing with more of an on-stage hater where you might respond once and then ignore it. Or in some cases where the person is literally harassing and trolling everybody and at some point has violated the conditions of that social media platform. And at that point, you can reasonably ban them.
There's always one of those in every industry, isn't there?
Yeah. And it might have evolved since I work in social. So if we have any social experts on later, I'd definitely ask them too. But that was kind of what I followed at the time.
Have you actually ever been responsible for responding to like a public tweet
or
LinkedIn
yes.
post?
Yeah, that was when I first was hired at the agency I worked for, I was in charge of a pilot program for Marriott with a lot of large hotels that they had. And so at that point, we were fairly new. So I was an account manager, but I was also doing all the creative, a lot of the responses. We had support, but they would like escalate most of those to me. So yes, I had to deal with trolls quite frequently, or just like legitimately angry guests, high volume.
Wow.
Angry guests.
To me, those are the scariest situations because it's not like behind closed doors where you can deal with it like person to person. Everyone else is watching you and how you respond, and they all have an opinion on what they think versus how you responded, how you should have responded. So to me, that's like the scariest, difficult conversation to have personally.
Yeah, it's certainly quite public. And then if you add in the layer where it's a social agency or if you have an agency model, those people are your clients. So it's not only your coworkers or your bosses, but it's also your clients. That said, like there is a certain amount of expertise and creating a process for it and knowing how to handle it that you can actually show your value with that, kind of like the other angry customer discussion we talked about.
I think that's so crazy. This is kind of off topic, but I made a TikTok a month or so ago about being a person in a professional world with tattoos. And overall, the response was really positive. And I don't really normally look at the comments at all. I'm just not that active there. And somebody went in and was like, oh my God, you're just trying to get attention. And it was like a really mean thing to say. And I was like, oh my God, I've arrived. Somebody's trolling me. This means
You've made it.
It's real.
Yes.
I made it. And I think that that's the perspective shift, because sometimes when people look at those things, even if they're public, maybe this is different for an agency, but it's the person who's spewing the hate that gets the bad reputation in my mind. If somebody's going out of their way to be cruel and aggressive in a public space, that says a lot more about them than the person they're attacking. So
and I find it's really rare in SaaS. Like I haven't had an experience where I've had I think at this point, hundreds, if not thousands of customers. I've never had one just like trolling. I've had some that are pretty angry and when I say angry, like they purchased our product to solve a problem for them. It's not solving it. And now they're really upset.
Yeah.
When I say angry. So they have a right to be often. So I've definitely had that where they've resorted to social channels, but obviously always hoping that they resolve it with a conversation with us, or at least if they go to social channels, that gives us the opportunity to raise that conversation with them if they're not already speaking with someone.
And it sounds like you're treating these people with, like we said before, empathy. So it's very possible that maybe if they weren't getting any responses, they would be going to Twitter or LinkedIn and resorting to that. But I think in general, the SaaS world has processes in place for customers to get the support that they need. So hopefully that's a good thing for this industry, that we're not seeing all of the trolling.
So I want to pivot the conversation a little bit from handling difficult conversations or angry customers to handling difficult conversations maybe internally, whether you're managing up, managing down, because a lot of the people that listen are either in manager or leadership roles in this podcast. And in my opinion, as a new manager, I think having hard conversations with fellow peers and employees is much more difficult than having difficult conversations with prospects or customers. And I'm curious if you would have any different advice when it comes to dealing with a report when you have to deliver some negative feedback or anything along those lines.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I've managed people I think I started managing in 2016. And it definitely is different. You have different responsibility, a different level of responsibility, both to your team members, to your company. There's also, I would add, not only delivering it to associates that might report to you, but also managing up is definitely a very real thing. And that also takes some thought and care. What is the easiest way to avoid it becoming a struggle or very difficult, I would say, is just from the beginning, really establishing expectations of how that feedback should be shared, how it should be received, also understanding each other. So things I've used before are like working with me documents. As soon as you start working together, making a working with me document, understanding how they work. Katrina reminds me of like on Meetsy, we have a profile that you can fill out and say how you like to work and how you like to receive feedback. I also, even though they can seem corny, like the personality quizzes, personality exercises, I honestly don't care even which one you pick. But doing it as a team and really understanding like how people tick is incredibly important to lay that foundation before you have these hard conversations. Some other resources, like I really like Crucial Conversations, another old classic that was really helpful to me when I first managed about how to start approaching those conversations.
I love the personality quiz call out because I think it's such a fun way to understand ourselves and our peers.
Ashley and I actually hosted a meetup where we had the women take, was it the Myers-Briggs one? No,
it was
which one
Enneagram.
Was it? Yes. And then we actually did a whole discussion on like, how does this affect you as a salesperson, right? Like, do you like different things because you lean this way in your thinking and in your actions? And it was funny how all the women that were grouped in the different numbers all tended to like the same style of working in the sales world. And so I think it is really important as a manager or just as a fellow coworker to learn how each person likes to receive feedback, how they communicate, how they learn. I think that's a big one too, because I know on my team in particular, I have some people that are very visual learners. I have to repeat the same thing a couple of times for it to sink in. And there's other people that, hey, send it over to Slack and boom, done. I got it.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think also just having them understand like who you are too. Like for instance, I like StrengthsFinder a lot. That's the one like I go to bat for. I love StrengthsFinder. And there's one piece on there that says input, which means that you like a lot of information. And so I like to be CC'd. Like when in doubt, CC me. I often, like if I come back from like PTO, it's very natural for me to just like start collecting information and like going around Slack and just trying to find things and asking random questions, which can be unsettling to the rest of my team members unless they know I have input. And so I just like having the information accessible, and it has nothing to do with like anything. It doesn't have to do with anything negative. It's just simply a characteristic. So I think being able to like understand that about yourself, about your manager and like where they're coming from, as well as you yourself, is really, really helpful in those situations.
So note to self, I should start CCing you on everything.
You're going to get all of our podcast information just for no reason. I'm going to give it to you.
But yeah, so I mean, for your question, Katrina, like I think first, like making sure that you know each other and that you establish the right expectations when you're a manager. If you're an individual contributor or if you're a manager with a manager, also like letting your manager know like how you like to receive feedback and in what time, where it is also really important just to start that off quickly. And I like to nip things in the bud quickly, very directly, so it doesn't turn into an issue. Long-term, it's snowball.
Definitely. I love all of that advice. And I think we should all put it into practice, both with customers and with our coworkers. So this doesn't necessarily have to do with having tough conversations or, managing angry customers. But I know you have a story in particular about an experience you had early on in your career where you wrote an email that wasn't necessarily in your own tone as a woman, and it didn't go so well. And I think it's a really interesting story, and I'd love if you could share it.
Yeah, happy to share this story. And before I share it too, I do want to clarify, most of the people that have taken a big chance on me and mentored me have been male. So including some of the people involved in the story. So I think that this particular story as well is very reflective of my insecurity at the time, and insecurity being a woman in the workplace and not speaking the way I think would be effective or trying to be something that I'm not, essentially. So in this particular instance, I had expensed something and hadn't asked for permission ahead of time. So first problem there. I was very young. I was very new to this kind of role, like an office role. So after doing it, it was related to business with my coworkers. Submitted the expense report, and then with it, I had to write a note, and I was like really nervous, and I felt like really bad about it. And by the way, this was like for not very much money at all. It was very silly, but I was so like, I think like I was really uncomfortable with the idea of money and like spending business money. I was really like, I didn't know how to ask or say it. So my boyfriend at the time, was now my husband, he was the CEO of his own startup. And so I was like, well, how would he say it? Like, just copy and paste that. And so I asked him to write it for me and then shot off the email to the person responsible for approving it. And their response was that this was like the most entitled thing that they'd ever seen. They didn't know where this was coming from. Like, it was very upsetting to them that they'd received that. Yes, which of course I was horrified and so embarrassed, which had not been my intention. And what I think like that story shows is, first of all, get comfortable talking about money. Second of all, ask for permission before you spend business money. But most importantly, that it's very important, and I think as a woman in business or any other minority in business, to get comfortable speaking as yourself, because you don't want to be embarrassed for trying to speak like somebody else.
Yeah.
This whole situation reminds me what a lot of young female SDRs go through when they join a team and there's pre-made sequences that have been built out for them for outbound messaging. And they read it and they go, I would never speak like that. And I don't feel comfortable sending that. And a lot of times, well, not a lot of times, in some situations, they're not allowed to edit those sequences or those templates, and they're forced to send them. And I remember when I was an SDR, newly minted, right? So this was before I had proven my value and was allowed to kind of get creative and go outside the box. And I had sent this sequence off that was made by my manager. And I got a response from a prospect that was like, this is such a rude email. And I was like, and I also thought, I was like, oh my God, this is like a really aggressive note. And yet my male counterpart SDRs were sending the same emails and never got any negative responses. And I don't know if that's like a man versus woman tone thing, but I think it's true that like you do need to find your own tone that works for you and that you're comfortable with and use it. But it was just a really interesting dynamic that I was the only person that got negative responses from those emails.
Yeah, I think there was, I forget if it was a study or a meme. Like, so this may have absolutely no like actual research merit to it.
We stand memes, so that's okay. We count it as real research.
And I don't have it up, but it was like, I think like a woman like tested sending an email as her boss for a week or something, or maybe he did the reverse. And the amount of pushback that they received when it was the female signing versus the male name was astounding, like quite black and white. And again, I haven't experienced a ton of that, like personally or that I'm aware of, like as a CSM when I was CSM. But I think also some of that is industry dependent. Some of it just has to do with a different company. But it is interesting. And like I think it's really like if you are quick to be getting that kind of feedback from people, you want it to be as yourself.
Yeah.
Ashley, have you ever experienced anything like that?
So when I think about these stories, my worst experiences, so like my name, Ashley, can be a man's name like in England, right? And so I've had a lot of prospects in the UK or in other countries that assumed I was a man in sales and went back like, thank you, sir. And like, so there's that, right? Where they just assume. And it's not common in the US because whatever, but I've sold into UK, EMEA, APAC, all the stuff, right? And so some of the different cultures do expect that I'm a man just based on my name. The other thing I'm thinking about, which is kind of off topic, is that at one point my team decided to have me send a video email instead of written email. Mm-hmm. And we had all of us do a video. And this was when we were in a PLG motion. And so somebody who had signed up for our product and we were saying like, hey, I'm your person. If you need to talk about this, if you want to upgrade, come talk to me. So there were a lot of people coming in and we were sending this to. We had male coworkers doing it and me. And I got hit on constantly via this email And I was pregnant in the video too. Like, you couldn't tell, but I'm like, you're hitting on a pregnant lady. Thank you very much.
Oh my God.
That did not happen to the men who did it. So I feel like there is some bias, like with written or video communication, just that happens. But that's been my personal. I've always broken the rules, though. I've never allowed anybody to write an email for me that I couldn't edit. So there's that. I've never just sent something that was not from my POV.
That's so funny that you mentioned the video thing, because I could totally, like, I've totally told CSS before, hey, make sure to include a video in there so at least they see a human. Mm-hmm. It gets a better, we see that it gets better response rate when we're looking at our sequences and the results, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And being the manager that doesn't even think about that piece of like, oh, I hope they don't get these really inappropriate responses. But yeah, so that's an interesting thing to bring up. I don't think that happens in success as much as sales.
I hope not. But
I've never seen that happen.
Having a septum piercing makes people think it's okay to say all kinds of things to you. Just FYI, if you're considering one.
Oh, that makes me upset.
It is upsetting. And it's just like, you think that you can judge me based on a tiny little piece of metal. I mean, I put it there, so I can't really be too upset if you're going to look at it and make assumptions about me. But also, do they have to be inappropriate ones? Because that's weird.
I messaged Ashley the other day. I sent her a screenshot because someone sent me a LinkedIn DM about a video I had made that was borderline crossing the line. And I was like,
no,
am I crazy? Like,
it was somebody who, like, I think at the end of the day, what we decided was like, no response is the best response because it's not Katrina's job to educate this man on the fact that that was inappropriate. And he may not have had bad intentions, but she doesn't have to be the one to teach him that that wasn't okay. And because it wasn't like blatantly gross, but it was too much, and the response,
it was unprofessional.
Yeah.
I think that some really good content for this podcast would be to A/B test septum piercings and other things in video email motions.
Interesting.
and share the results.
I think
we've got some testing to do, Ashley.
Just make a bunch of people go get a painful piercing for science.
So before we begin to wrap this up, Kate, is there one thing in particular, any advice you'd love to leave women in revenue with?
Yeah, I would absolutely say, like, trying to find your own voice, as cheesy as that sounds, and being true to your own personality at work. I know I've personally, when I've been hired at a new place or feeling comfortable, like, just for comfort or just because you're nervous or feel slightly inadequate or imposter syndrome, might try, adopting, like, talking like your coworkers or being like your coworkers or whatever. And I think it's really important, and something that I've definitely learned a lot in the past 2 years is that, like, for instance, in my case, they hired Kate Reed. They hired a mother of a toddler whose husband travels a lot, who has my exact background and my exact experience. And this is who they hired, and this is who they get. So I want to give my company and my team members, like, the best version of me I can, but only a version of me. And so that was kind of my biggest light bulb moment, I would say, in the past 2 years professionally is, and especially as a woman in revenue, we often might have more responsibilities than some others when it comes to childcare or other things. So just really reminding yourself that you were hired as you, and there's a reason that they hired you, I think is really, really powerful for whatever position you have in revenue. The other advice I got from a male counterpart one time was stay close to the money. So as women in revenue, just congratulations, stay in your revenue, help people grow. I think from a career standpoint, it's definitely something I really enjoy, and we'll always share that.
Also, don't be afraid to talk about money.
Yeah, that's a big one. Well, Kate, we always end every episode with a round of rapid fire would you rather revenue questions.
Okay.
So we've got 5 ready for you, and you don't need to explain your answers, but if you want to, you're more than welcome to. So are you ready for your questions?
I'm so excited for this. Yes.
All right. Question number 1. Would you rather build a customer experience program from scratch with limited tooling, or would you rather take over a well-established customer experience program that has lots and lots of issues?
Oh, they both sound fun to me. Am I
You're such a problem solver. I love it.
Yeah, they both sound fun. I'm going to take the first one because that's what I'm doing right now and it's exciting.
That's true. You are. Would you rather have to give up using a CRM or would you rather give up using a customer intelligence platform?
Customer intelligence platform.
Seems like that was a no-brainer for you.
Yep.
I worked at a CRM company. I'm extremely biased for this
That's
one.
Fair. That's fair.
Yep.
Would you rather handle an angry customer who expects you to apologize for things that are beyond your control or handle an angry customer who constantly interrupts and talks over you?
Well, the first one. But I'm happy to deal with both of them.
You're so funny. All right, fourth question. Would you rather have to run a marathon every time a customer churns or have to include 50 emojis in every email you send to a customer?
Oh my God.
Emojis.
Hey, but you are a marathon runner, so you got this.
I ran one. Yeah, it was really hard.
Now you're a marathon runner.
Yeah, now I'm a marathon runner. So yeah.
And last question. Would you rather have to get a Commsor dinosaur tattoo or have an embarrassing selfie in your email signature?
Oh, I'll get the tattoo.
Love it.
Let's do it. Let's go get
Love
tattoos.
tattoos.
Can I get
It's
one
not
too?
very hard to get. Yeah, it's not very hard to convince me to get a tattoo.
Love it.
Good to know for the future. All right.
All right. Well, I appreciate you. I think that it's just been really great to have somebody on that has the perspective of the customer success and the experience, and talking about difficult conversations from that perspective is so helpful. So thank you for joining us today. I just want to remind everybody the purpose of this podcast is to elevate women in sales and other revenue-facing roles. So thank you for listening. And if you want to support Kate, follow along on LinkedIn. Kate, is there somewhere else we can find you, or is that the best place?
LinkedIn's the best place for right now.
She doesn't want you coming after her on social, so LinkedIn.
No trolls.
Yes, and if you would like to listen to Kate's song choice, Stevie Nicks, I encourage you to go onto Spotify, find our playlist, Ashley and Katrina's Infinite Revenue playlist, and you will find her song along with everyone else's in the best playlist ever. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, Kate.
Thanks, y'all. Have a good one.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Ashley and Katrina's Infinite Revenue Playlist. This show is powered by Commsor, the go-to-network company. Commsor is the complete suite of tools for teams looking to grow, activate, and engage their networks. If you enjoyed the learnings and banter in this episode, there's more where this came from. Follow Ashley and Katrina's Infinite Revenue Playlist wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. See you next time.